No one knew that on Anne Boleyn's final morning, time stopped at the tower, literally. The clock froze at 8:02 and never worked again. Welcome to Secret Stories, where we uncover the hidden truths behind history's most compelling moments. Today we journey back to May 19, 1536, to the Tower of London, where a queen spent her final 24 hours on Earth. But this is not just a story about death. This is about dignity, mystery, and the strange silence that fell over one of England's most infamous executions. 19 days earlier, Anne Boleyn was Queen of England. She wore emerald green velvet, walked beside King Henry VIII, and held the future of a nation in her hands. Now in a cold stone cell at the Tower of London, she waited for dawn. The charges against her were treason, adultery with 5 men, and witchcraft. None of it was true. Every single accusation was crafted by Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, who needed Anne gone to clear the path for a new queen. May 18, 1536. 7 o'clock in the evening. Anne sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the walls. The cell was not large, 12 feet by 10 feet, one small window with iron bars, a wooden table, a chair, a candle. That was all. Lady Kingston, the wife of the Tower Constable, sat in the corner watching her. Anne had not cried once since arriving at the tower. She had not begged. She had not screamed. That alone unnerved the guards. She asked Lady Kingston for parchment, ink, and a quill. She wanted to write a letter to her daughter, Elizabeth. The little girl was only 2 years old. Anne knew she would never see her again. Lady Kingston handed her the materials and turned away. Anne dipped the quill into the ink and began to write. The first sentence came easily. "My dearest Elizabeth, you will not remember me, but I will always remember you." Then the ink stopped flowing. Anne dipped the quill again. Nothing. She tried a third time. The ink had thickened, almost frozen. It was May. The air outside was warm. But inside the cell, Anne could see her breath. She looked at the candle. The flame was steady. There was no draft, no wind. Yet the air felt heavy, as if something invisible was pressing down on the room. Lady Kingston noticed it too. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and glanced at the door. "Your Majesty, are you cold?" Anne did not answer. She set the quill down and folded the unfinished letter. "It does not matter," she said quietly. "She will not need my words. She will make her own." 8 o'clock. The tower bells rang. Anne stood and walked to the window. Below in the courtyard, workers were preparing the scaffold, sawdust, fresh straw, a low wooden platform. Anne watched them without expression. Lady Kingston could not look away from her. There was something about the way Anne stood there, so still, so calm. It was not natural. Most prisoners wept. Most prisoners prayed. Most prisoners broke. Anne turned from the window and sat back down. "Do you know what I asked for, Lady Kingston?" she said. Her voice was soft, almost conversational. "I asked the king to send for a swordsman from France. Not an axe, a sword." Lady Kingston blinked. "Why, Your Majesty?" Anne smiled faintly. "Because a sword is faster, cleaner. I have a small neck. It will be over quickly." Lady Kingston felt her throat tighten. She had witnessed executions before. She had seen men and women beg for mercy, scream for their mothers, faint on the scaffold. But Anne Boleyn was speaking about her own death, as if she were planning a dinner party. "You are very brave, Your Majesty," Lady Kingston whispered. Anne looked at her. "I am not brave. I am simply tired of being afraid." 9 o'clock. The candle burned lower. Anne lay down on the bed but did not close her eyes. She stared at the ceiling. The stone was damp, covered in moss. Somewhere above her, someone was walking, slow, heavy footsteps. Anne listened. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again in the same place. Back and forth, back and forth. Lady Kingston heard it too. "Who is walking upstairs?" Anne asked. Lady Kingston shook her head. "No one, Your Majesty. That floor is empty." The footsteps continued. Anne sat up. "Then who is it?" Lady Kingston did not answer. She pressed her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was not the silence of an empty building. It was the silence of something waiting. 10 o'clock. Anne asked for water. Lady Kingston poured it from a clay pitcher. The water was cold, fresh from the well. Anne took the cup and drank. Then she paused. She held the cup to her lips but did not swallow. "This water tastes strange," she said. Lady Kingston frowned. "Strange how, Your Majesty?" Anne set the cup down. "Like metal, like blood." Lady Kingston picked up the cup and tasted it herself. It tasted like water, nothing more. She looked at Anne, unsure what to say. Anne stood and walked back to the window. Outside, the moon was bright, too bright. The courtyard was empty now. The workers had gone home. But Anne saw something move near the scaffold, a shadow. It crossed the platform, paused, then disappeared. Anne blinked. The shadow did not return. She pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars. "Do you believe in ghosts, Lady Kingston?" Lady Kingston hesitated. "I do not know, Your Majesty." Anne nodded slowly. "I did not either. But now I think they are everywhere, watching, waiting for us to join them. 11 o'clock. The candle flickered. Anne returned to the bed. She pulled the thin blanket over her shoulders. Lady Kingston dozed off in her chair, her head lolling to one side. Anne lay awake. She thought about Elizabeth. She thought about Henry. She thought about the moment she first met him, at a masquerade ball when he had been so charming, so full of life. She thought about the day he told her she would be queen. She thought about the day he told her she would die. Midnight. The tower bells rang 12 times. Anne counted each one. On the 12th bell, the clock on the wall made a strange sound, a grinding metallic click. Then it stopped. The second hand froze. The minute hand froze. Anne stared at it. Lady Kingston woke with a start. What was that? Anne pointed at the clock. It stopped. Lady Kingston stood and walked over to it. She tapped the glass. Nothing. She wound the key. Nothing. "It was working an hour ago," she said. Anne said nothing. She just watched the frozen hands. 8:02, 1 o'clock in the morning. Anne closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she dreamed. She saw herself as a child, running through the gardens at Hever Castle. She saw her brother George laughing as he chased her. She saw her mother holding her hand, telling her she was special. She saw her father, cold and distant, always disappointed. She saw Henry, young and golden, lifting her into his arms. She saw the crown placed on her head. She saw the moment she realized she was trapped. 2 o'clock. Anne opened her eyes. The room was darker now. The candle had burned down to a stub. Lady Kingston was asleep again. Anne sat up. She heard something. A whisper, soft, barely audible. She turned her head. Nothing. The whisper came again. It sounded like her name. "Anne!" She stood. "Who is there?" No answer. Just the whisper. "Anne." It was coming from the corner of the room. The dark corner, where the candlelight did not reach. Anne took a step toward it. Then she stopped. Whatever was there, she did not want to see it. 3 o'clock. Lady Kingston woke again. She looked at Anne, who was standing in the middle of the room, staring at the wall. "Your Majesty, are you well?" Anne did not turn. "Do you hear that?" Lady Kingston listened. She heard nothing. "Hear what, Your Majesty?" Anne tilted her head. "Singing. Someone is singing." Lady Kingston stood and walked to the door. She opened it and looked out into the corridor. Empty. Silent. She closed the door. "There is no one, Your Majesty." Anne finally turned. "I know. 4 o'clock. The coldest hour." Anne sat at the table. She folded her hands and closed her eyes. She prayed. Not for mercy, not for salvation. She prayed for Elizabeth. She prayed that her daughter would be strong, that she would be wise, that she would remember her mother as more than a scandal. Lady Kingston watched her. There was something different about Anne now, something calmer, as if she had made peace with something the rest of them could not see. 5 o'clock. The first light of dawn crept through the window. Anne stood and walked to it. The sky was pale grey, streaked with pink. The courtyard was still empty. But soon it would fill with people, nobles, clergy, curious onlookers. They would come to watch her die. Anne took a deep breath. "It is almost time," she said. Lady Kingston nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty, 6 o'clock." A guard knocked on the door. Lady Kingston opened it. The guard handed her a grey dress, a white coif and a red petticoat. "For the Queen," he said. Lady Kingston took the clothes and closed the door. Anne undressed slowly. She folded her nightgown and set it on the bed. She put on the grey dress. It was simple, plain, nothing like the gowns she had worn as queen. She tied the white coif over her dark hair. She smoothed the red petticoat. Red, the colour of martyrs, 7 o'clock. Anne knelt on the stone floor and prayed one last time. Lady Kingston knelt beside her. When Anne finished, she stood and looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Thin, pale, hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes. But her gaze was steady. "I am ready," she said. 7:30. The constable, Sir William Kingston, arrived at the door. He bowed stiffly. "Your Majesty, it is time." Anne nodded. She walked to the door. Lady Kingston followed. They descended the stone staircase. Each step echoed. Anne counted them. 43 steps. At the bottom, 2 guards waited. They did not look at her. They looked at the floor, 8 o'clock. Anne stepped out into the courtyard. The crowd was already there. 2,000 people. Maybe more. They stood in silence. No one shouted. No one jeered. That was unusual. Normally, crowds at executions were loud, cruel, eager for blood. But this crowd was different. They stared at Anne as if they could not believe what they were seeing. A queen walking to her death, Anne walked toward the scaffold. She counted her steps. 47. The scaffold was low, only 2 feet off the ground, covered in fresh straw. In the center, a wooden block. No, wait, there was no block. Anne stopped. She looked at the executioner. He was tall, dressed in black, his face covered. He held a sword, a long, thin sword, the one she had requested. He bowed to her. Anne climbed the steps. 1, 2, 3. She stood on the platform. The crowd was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She turned to face them. She opened her mouth to speak. "Good Christian people, I am come here to die according to law. I do not come here to accuse any man, nor to speak of that whereof I am accused. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. To me he was ever a good and gentle sovereign lord." Her voice did not shake. Not once. She finished her speech and turned to the executioner. He gestured for her to kneel. Anne knelt on the straw. She removed her coif. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. She tied a blindfold over her eyes. She placed her hands together and whispered one final prayer. "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul." The executioner raised the sword. The crowd held its breath. And then, for exactly 3 seconds, the Tower of London fell into absolute silence. No wind, no birds, no movement. It was as if the world itself had paused. 8:15. The sword fell. It was over. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was dead. The executioner bent down and lifted her head. He held it up for the crowd to see. No one cheered. No one moved. They just stared. One woman in the crowd later said she felt as if she had seen this moment before, as if it had already happened, somewhere else in another time. The body was placed in an arrow chest. There was no coffin, no ceremony, just a plain wooden box. Anne Boleyn was buried in the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula, inside the tower. No marker, no gravestone, just dirt. But the story did not end there. The clock in Anne's cell never worked again. Workers tried to fix it. They replaced the gears, the springs, the hands, nothing. It remained frozen at 8:02. Some said it was broken. Others said it refused to move. In the years that followed, guards at the tower reported strange occurrences. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening on their own, cold drafts in rooms with no windows. And on May 19th every year, at exactly 8:02 in the morning, the tower falls silent. The ravens do not fly. The wind does not blow. Visitors report feeling watched. Some say they see a figure in grey standing by the scaffold. Others say they hear singing, a woman's voice, soft and distant, singing a lullaby. Anne's daughter Elizabeth grew up to become one of the greatest queens in English history. She ruled for 45 years. She never married. She never had children. And she never spoke of her mother. But in her private chambers she kept a portrait, a small painting of a woman in a green dress. Dark hair, dark eyes, a slight smile. On the back of the portrait, written in Elizabeth's own hand, were 3 words: "My dearest mother, Anne Boleyn was executed for crimes she did not commit. She was erased from history by the man who once loved her, but she was never forgotten. Her story lived on, in whispers, in legends, in the cold stone walls of the Tower of London, and in the clock that stopped at 8:02 and refused to move ever again. Some say time did not stop that morning. Some say it simply paused waiting for justice. And perhaps in some way it still is.